Thank you very much, Ronnie. I am delighted to be here and so happy to have you here with us to join us at this very exciting conference. The upcoming panel is one that you want to hear, and I'm not going to delay. Evan Smith will be our moderator. Evan joined the staff of Texas Monthly as a senior editor in January of 1992. In February 1993, he was promoted to deputy director, and in July 2000, he was promoted to editor. In May 2002, he added the title of executive vice president, and just recently, in September 2008, he was promoted to president and editor-in-chief. Congratulations, Evan. Since he took over, Texas Monthly has been nominated for 14 National Magazine Awards, the industry's equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize. He is a native of New York. Don't worry, we won't hold that against you, Evan. Evan Smith has a passion for politics. During his tenure at Texas Monthly, the magazine has focused increasingly on politics in Texas, aside, of course, from the now famous or infamous Texas Monthly Top 10 and Best and Worst list. The topic that we have for today couldn't be more fitting. Who's right, who's left, what's next? Texas politics and policy beyond 2008. And certainly, the title reflects the November 4th election. In the Texas House of Representatives, we're not positive yet. It's either a 76-74 Republican-Democratic split, or it could be 75-75, depending on a race in Irving. There are about 29 vote difference, and they're counting the provisionals as we sit here now. We also, of course, know that we have a Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives, and I think that this panel can certainly reflect on what those numbers mean for the Speaker's race, and of course the agenda of the 81st legislative session, which begins in January 13th. And let's not forget that next Monday, November 10th, pre-filing of bills starts. In the Senate, we know that at least one Democrat has been added, maybe two, depending on the Crispell runoff. What will this mean, and I'm sure our panel again can comment, as far as the blocker bill and the flow of legislation to the floor of the Senate and the agenda of the Senate. So, without any further comment, I will hand it over to Evan Smith. Thank you, Evan, for joining us today.
Sherry, thank you, and thank you to everybody for being here. I guess I'm supposed to wire myself up. Let me ask that the panelists just join us up on stage in the interest of time so we can get the panel going. Let me ask that the panelists come up on stage and I'll say a few words about them. We're very lucky to be here with an extraordinary panel of state legislators, members of the House and Senate, who are joining us up on stage right now. In this wonderful group, you heard Sherry mention the Texas Monthly biennial list of best and worst legislators. 3 of the people on our panel today have been cited as best legislators in past sessions. 2 of those 3 have actually been cited as best legislators more than once. We also have a past Rookie of the Year here up on the panel. We have, we believe, 2 speaker candidates up here on the panel, unless Representative Madden wants to join in and say that he wants it, we can go for 3. It might actually at this point be easier to name the people who are not speaker candidates than people who are speaker candidates. We have 1 previous candidate for statewide elective office, and we have 1, I believe, future candidate for statewide elective office here on the panel. So without further ado, let me quickly, I'm just making assumptions while we go along here because it'll be more fun if we do. Let me quickly introduce our panelists, and then we're going to get right into the questions. On my immediate left is Scott Hochberg, elected to the Texas House first in 1992, began serving in 1993. He is, of course, a Democrat. He represents Southwest Houston. This is District 137. Next to him is Representative Jerry Madden, also elected in 92, began serving in 1993, representing parts of Collin County. This is District 67. He is a Republican. Next to Representative Madden is Senator Florence Shapiro, also elected in 92, began serving in 93, representing both Dallas and Collin County, District 8 in the Senate. Next to Senator Shapiro is Representative Sylvester Turner, elected in 1988, began serving in 1989, representing Houston. This is District 139. And then to Representative Turner's left is Senator Kirk Watson, who represents Travis County, elected in 2006. That's District 14. Let's give these 5 wonderful legislators a hand, please. Well, let me very quickly begin by posing to the panel, and we can go maybe down the line, beginning with Representative Hochberg, this question. There are two potential views of November 4th as it relates to Texas. One is that Texas was an outlier compared to other states, that the rest of the country, a lot of other red states, began to be more blue or at least purplish in the course of this election cycle, and the results of November 4th, all the states that flipped from red to blue would certainly confirm that. But Texas was an outlier in that no statewide elective offices changed from Republican to Democrat. There were some gains at the legislative level and locally, but basically Texas was and remains a Republican state. That's one view. The second view is one advanced by my colleague Paul Burka in a story that we'll publish this week in the new issue of Texas Monthly. This was a seam election. This was a seam election, stitching together the Texas that was and the Texas that will be. Change is here, it's coming, and this election is kind of the seam between the Texas before and the Texas to come. Let me ask, which of those views do you subscribe to? First, Representative Hochberg.
Well, thank you, Evan. I subscribe to whatever Burka says. That's always a good. That's always good advice. I'm gonna do the consensus building thing. I'm gonna pick a little bit of both, because I think it depends on where you look. If you look at the area I represent in Houston and some of the districts around me, sort of everything south of the Woodlands in the Houston area, or parts of Dallas, Jerry, and Florence, it's a very different place than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Sylvester, my district has probably, my high school has 42 native languages in it. There's parts of Dallas that look like that. And in those areas, it's very different politically than it used to be. It's much more Democratic-leaning, partisan-wise. But it's also a lot of people who don't come with strong allegiances one way or another. And it starts looking like that melting pot that Texas really wasn't many years ago. I think in other parts of the state looks a lot like it always has. And so you see changes in metro areas and legislative districts. You don't necessarily see that reflected as a whole in the state, but the population growth is in areas like the ones I described.
Okay. Representative Matt?
Evan, you're going to see some consensus building here, because I'm a both and neither on the position, because I was at the National Conference of State Legislators here about 4 or 5 months ago, and they talked about the great demographic changes that are going on in the country, and we certainly have seen that. We see two particular ones that are happening. One is what they call the graying of America, and the other one is what they call the browning of America. We're seeing, first of all, the population is getting older. And we see that in all of our districts. The average, the generation that came after the generation I'm in, at least, there's fewer people, and it's a change that the country's going to have to look at as far as the age that's there and the problems of an aging baby boomer generation, and the fact that the generations behind them are smaller. The second is the immigration patterns, not illegal immigration, but legal immigration. The birth rates. The average Anglo birth rate is way below about 1.7, I think it is, in children, and the Hispanic birth rate is something like 3.5 kids per family. That's a huge change, and has nothing to do with illegal immigration at that stage, and then they also talked about the patterns of immigration. It's very interesting. So there's a lot of change that's happening out there. Change will always be the pattern. It's always been the pattern in our progress of our country, and I'm sure it's going to continue. So change is there. But also the state did reinforce its current position, and I think didn't change a lot politically.
Senator?
Thank you. I have to say, I remember a friend of mine who used to be a state senator, Mike Moncrief, who used to say, some of my friends are for it, some of my friends are against it, and I'm going with my friends. I think that what we have here is a little bit of both. And I think what we're seeing is the future is going to decide which one of those is actually the truth. I do believe that we see the state of Texas as an anomaly, obviously, as red as we are. We've stayed red. But at the same time, I think what we're seeing here are big demographic changes in the suburbs. Our community, Jerry's and mine, stayed very, very solidly Republican, but the other communities in my Senate district that surround Dallas, and of course Dallas is Democrat now, and a lot of the suburbs also voted for Democrats. So we're seeing a change in the demographics, but are we seeing such a great change that it's a bullseye and we say, well, we're turning and it's going to change. I don't know that yet. I think the future will tell us that. What I know we know, and what I know we ought to be looking at, is that it was a victory for bipartisanship. I think this session in the legislature, we're going to see tremendous bipartisanship. In the Senate, you see it all the time because we have the 21 vote rule, and we spend a lot of time across the aisle with one another. In the House, and I'm not going to speak for the House, of course, they're going to have to deal with this, and it's a different day and a different time. I think it's a great time for leadership. I think what we're seeing is there needs to be leadership involved in this new day that we're seeing. And I also think it's a great time to look locally at each of our communities, whether it's our school children or our business owners or our local homeowners or taxpayers. I think what this election said to all of us is it's back at home that we need to start paying attention to what's going on. And to me, that's a little bit of both of what you just asked.
Okay. Representative Turner.
Thank you. It's certainly the state is undergoing demographic changes. I mean, that is clear. We can look at the numbers. So I think 10 years from now, even now, we are seeing a new state. And the question is, how will people respond? What type of leadership there will be? I think, let me just say, people respond to those people who respond to their needs, who they respond to people who come forth with ideas that are optimistic and can provide a vision that people can buy into. And to the extent there is leadership in the state of Texas that offers vision, hope, ideas, meet people's needs, result-oriented, and place people before their own interests, I think people will respond to that. And if you don't do it, I think people will not respond to it. I think what ended up happening on the national scene in many, many ways is that people looked into their own lives. They didn't like what they saw. They didn't like the status quo. And so they wanted something fresh. They wanted something new. They wanted something visionary. They wanted something positive. And they wanted something that said that yesterday I don't like, today I'm not happy with, offer me something better, and I will go in that direction. Texas is always, I think, slower to move than many others. But let me use this analogy. It's like a cool front coming down from the north. The winds will take it, and as the cool front comes down and enters the state of Texas, there will be a clash of the cool and the hot.
Good analogy.
And then eventually, as the winds continue to blow, it will blow through the state. My vision is that the cool front has started in the north, and it is coming down, and Texas will inevitably be caught in it. The winds will continue to blow, and those will come with ideas and freshness will move forward, and Texas will move accordingly.
Good speech.
Now, Kirk, I'm sorry to have to make you follow that.
Yeah. Well, I did kind of get rained on, didn't I?
Kirk, you might say that Texas has a tradition also of the hot air continuing to rise.
Right. Very good point. Very good point.
This is going to be a great panel.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I forget the question.
Just say anything you want.
Yeah. let me give my stump speech.
Let me give you my stuff.
Here, I think.
All right, we broke the ice.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the scene really is. I actually think you've heard a lot of different discussion, and I think that pretty much everything you've heard is right in one way or another to some degree or another in terms of demographic changes, in terms of political changes, those kinds of things, in terms of cold and hot air. But I would add one other element to that theme, and it's kind of been mentioned a couple of times, and that is there's a need for leadership, and there's a need for people. I think one of the things that has occurred is people very much want to see their government actually work.
Absolutely.
And work well. And I think that was one of the big messages on the national level, and I believe it's becoming a lesson for us all on the state level. I think that some of the politics in some of these House races revolving around, in many instances, a personality that wasn't on the ballot in those districts deals with whether or not government is actually working. I find it interesting that one of the things that you hear more and more is government working when it comes to things like our roadways, when it comes to things like higher education. And we rest on our laurels a lot, but I think the public is starting to say we're not going to let you do that anymore. I tell people all the time that it's the folks at the University of Texas at Austin right now, those kids are probably going to be the first generation of Texans that don't inherit excess capacity in infrastructure. We did, and now the roads are clogged. We've got water issues we have to address. We're not producing enough workforce out of our higher education institutions. And so they're going to have to grow their economy at the very same time they're having to pay for the infrastructure that we hadn't paid for. And I think the public is saying we want that. The other thing I'll say about that is in many of these districts where it wasn't a red or blue change, those lines have been drawn so tight, you're just not going to get a change. And I think ultimately that will work to Texas's great disadvantage if we do redistricting in such a way that there's no room for moderate thought. There's no room for what Senator Shapiro talked about that happens in the Senate, where even those lines are drawn awful tight. You don't have people reaching across. Government doesn't work well when that's the situation. I think the public's telling us they want something different.
Okay, great. All great opening remarks. Let's get right into the flame here. Senator Shapiro talked about the House and said, you know, I'll leave that to others to talk about. Well, let's talk about that. Representative Turner,
right ahead.
Representative Turner, you are a candidate for Speaker.
Yes.
Representative Hochberg, you are alleged to be a candidate for Speaker.
Alleged by you first.
Alleged by me first, although
Yes, I am a candidate.
You are a candidate for Speaker. Representative Madden, you are not. Okay.
Not today.
Not today, anyway.
Right. How material are the results of Tuesday as they relate to the prospect of a speaker's race? Does the fact of 76-74 or 75-75 for that matter make it that much less likely that this is going to result in a new speaker? You know, the question is, will any ABC candidate be able to get the votes for speaker if there are ABCs plural, all attempting to be the alternative to the current speaker? Representative Turner first, and then Representative Hochberg.
To me, what 76-74 indicates is that whoever wants to be Speaker of the Texas House is going to have to form a consensus and work with others on both sides of the aisle. It means that there is 76-74, but there are 150 members in the House, 150 members chosen in their own individual districts to represent their districts and ultimately the state of Texas. What it says is that it will be competitive, and it should be. People should be able and made to present themselves and how they can advance the interests of the House. And when I say the House, the interests of the people of the state of Texas, maintain the dignity and integrity of the Texas House, and also be representative of their districts. And I think it in many, many ways, it forces people to be respectful of each individual member and allow members to go through their own sense of thinking, their own processes, and able to determine who best will represent the interests of the House. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. We don't have the sort of logistics in the House that they do in the Senate, where you have, unless you can block something. But I think what you do have with the dynamics that are presently in place is that no one group, no one segment can dictate to the other 150. That everyone must be respectful of people's differences, their districts, where they come from, their politics, and then work with everyone to advance that. It's an open game.
Can you beat Speaker Craddick with more than one candidate in opposition to Speaker Craddick in that race? Can you beat him in that way?
But I don't view it that way. It's not about beating Speaker Craddick or beating anyone else. It's about saying to the members, the other 149, to the extent one is a candidate, it's about saying to the other 149 why you should earn the right to be Speaker. I think Speaker Craddick has to be Speaker Craddick and advance his cause. Representative Hochberg advance his cause. Representative Turner has to advance his cause. It doesn't mean that I have to put down or be against anybody else. If we start that way, then the House will run that way. I think the ultimate question is why any one person who desires to be Speaker, why you should be considered and why the other members should vote for you, and whether or not you will maintain the integrity of the institution, be respectful of other members, allow them to advance their program in a democratic system, and understand that the people of the state of Texas are not well served when we are operated with a House divided and purely on partisan politics.
Representative Hochberg, it sounds like a platform for Representative Turner's Speaker's race. How about yours?
Representative Turner will always be the Speaker of the House, even if he's not the House Speaker. And I appreciate that, and I'm.
Now that statement almost caused me to vote for you.
All we need to do is have Eisler up here putting a few puns in on us.
What do I need to do to get you there, Sylvester? I think the most successful House session would be run by a Speaker who was elected by a coalition of a roughly balanced number of Democrats and Republicans. I think every one of, well, maybe not everyone, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think most every one of us would say that. The question is, logistically, can we get there? I don't know what can happen on the Republican side, multiple candidates. But I think if it's 76-74, I think we will have a Republican Speaker. I have increasing doubts that would be Mr. Craddick, but I will also tell you that I have never, ever bet against the man because he's a tremendous campaigner. He doesn't give up, and he knows a lot about how to win a speaker's race. But I think he got elected initially in a time when there were 88 Republicans, Jerry, or something, somewhere around there, and the Democrats had lost a lot of talent. It was right after redistricting, and it was a situation where you pretty much could just depend on your Republican votes and move forward. No speaker today will be able to do that successfully. There will always be some folks who, because of their districts, will need to vote a different way. I do a lot of work in school finance, and while we could have a Democratic plan for school finance, there are folks who are in the Democratic caucus who represent wealthy districts that may have different interests than the vast majority of the others, and if there aren't Republicans sitting on the other side who feel they're allowed to vote with us, then we never pass anything. So I think for us to be successful, it has to be comfortable for members of each side to vote their districts, like Sylvester said. And if we come down with a situation where 74 Democrats plus 2 elect a speaker, or 74 Republicans plus 2 elect a speaker, I think it's going to be very difficult for that speaker to successfully govern.
Representative Madden, is the speaker going to get the votes? What do you think?
Well, let me start off by what I perceive as the responsibilities that we have. First of all, obviously, every one of us up here is a politician because we have to be elected. And so that's part of the process that we go through. And this is some of the part of this is the political process that we're in, is part of what we're dealing with now. Second thing is we're all elected to represent the citizens, and the senators have close to 700,000 or more now in their districts, and the House members have around 150,000 or more in their districts right now. Our job is still to represent them. So that's our first vote has to be, I think, as a representative of our constituents that we're there, that have elected us there. The third thing, though, that we have to also be, or at least have the opportunity to be, is at some stage along the line you get to be a statesman, or you have the opportunity to be a statesman. And this is the time when statesmanship obviously is going to be an important part of determining who and where we go with this leadership and who steps up as the greatest statesman that says that we can pull these coalitions, as the gentleman have talked about. There's a pulling of coalitions that are there. I agree with him that I don't like to see it when it's divided and so closely divided that in fact the votes would be just one party or the other. I think the speakers traditionally in this state, and the power in this state has traditionally been in the House, where it's a split, where both parties are participating, when both are working in the process, where there is some leadership positions for both parties and both groups, and responsibilities are there. And I think it'd be a catastrophe for us if that doesn't continue, because there's great talent on both sides. I learned one of the things in my chairmanship in corrections is that not all the ideas come from one group or another. They don't come from one party or another. You've got to be able to pull those consensuses together, those ideas together, to be successful in what we're trying to do. And I hope that that will work out as this process plays forward. As also the election guy, as the guys in the House know, I've been on elections a few times. There's a process going on in elections, and the numbers, as Dr. Greenberg said earlier, there's changes that will still occur in those numbers out there. And I personally think there's two races that are out there, because only one of them was 102 votes different, and the other one was 25 or 26. And that can change, because there are some votes still to be counted. And that's particularly those that are military and absentee votes.
You're referring to the Houston race that we're...
No, I'm talking
the Hobson race. Okay, so the Hobson race is 102 votes. Are you aware of a recount being called in that race?
I'm sure there will be, because it's within the percentages.
It is within the margin. Okay.
Margin. I'm pretty sure it would be, in whether they call for it or not. You don't call for it until after these early votes, these votes that are still there to come in, because there's military voters out there that can change the race. And so some of those could still be there, and so those numbers are important to look at.
Right. Senator Shapiro, let me ask you, if it is, we know it's +1 Democratic right now in the Senate as a change, possibly +2. We'll see how the runoff goes. Does that really make a difference in terms of how the Senate runs? You referred to the particular nature of the way things go in the Senate. How much of a difference would that difference make?
Well, I like to believe that certainly the numbers, you always add the numbers, and then you say, well, there's more of one than there is the other. But it's so close. And I also think that you really have to do it on any given issue. There's many times Senator Watson and I will be on the same side against a group of other people. It's very, very often that he has an issue and I have an issue, so much in education, so often in transportation, so often. I mean, I can think of numerous things that we have to work together. The 21-vote rule in the state Senate is a very, very significant issue for all of us, because it forces us. I've been there when we were only 11, and I've been there now when we were 20. It's the same problem, and it's maintained. You must cross the aisle to get consensus. You've got to have 21 votes, and if you don't have 21 people to vote for it out of your own party, you've got to go across the aisle. And it's really driven by issues, and that's the way it should be. It should be driven by issues. Exactly what was said earlier. Every community has their own issues, and you represent those communities. When you come to Austin, there's so much diversity, but there's also so much that we have in common. And when we find that commonality, we learn how to work together, we learn how to make decisions, and I think it's in the best interest of the citizens of Texas.
Okay, good. Senator Watson, what do you think? How much of a difference will there be in the way the Senate's run this time?
It will make a difference in, I agree with everything that Senator Shapiro just said, and the only thing I would add to that is it will make a difference in one or two situations where if the issue I'll say three things. One, it probably increases bipartisanship, because now it is, quote, harder for people to be peeled off if the Democrats want to block something. So now in instances where, and these are rare instances, but in instances where the Republicans might have thought, we can get one vote off of there.
You want to name who they are?
No.
He may be thinking of somebody, but he's not going to say.
We're both thinking of the same people.
So that becomes a little more difficult. It actually ought to enhance bipartisanship. The other situation, which is probably the same thing but just a finer point on it, is in those specific issues like happened last time, the last session, where the lieutenant governor really wanted to call something up, and so we, on voter ID, where we ended up in a situation where one guy was sick, that's less likely to happen. And for obvious reasons, you have one that can be given away, if you will.
Yep.
And then the final thing I'll say about it, along those lines, again, it's just kind of making a finer point of what's already been said, and that is there may be some issues that the Democrats in the past would have liked to have been able to push harder in a positive sense, not in trying to block something, but in a positive sense, that it gives them a little more leverage now in negotiating on some of those individual issues. And I could see where that could happen, where there might be something that I'll go along with that but only if you'll go along with something else I've got, and I'm not going to go along with it, and we've got the votes to not go along with it unless you come. But again, I think that ultimately, I say that, it sounds kind of negative, but I really mean that in a positive sense. I think it leads to greater consensus and greater potential bipartisanship.
Better policy, I think.
Okay, well, let's get to that better policy. We've talked a little bit about the inside baseball parts of November 4th. Let's talk about the meat now. What in each of your cases do you believe is going to be the big issue in the body that you serve in as we go into this session? If you had to pick one, what do you want to tell us we should be looking out for? The big issue in the House first and then the Senate. Start with Representative Madden. What's it going to be?
It's always budget and money, always.
But you want to be specific under the umbrella.
That's about as specific as I can get. It's always about the money. You follow the money.
That's like the sky, you know. Is there an aspect of the budget, an area of the budget from a policy standpoint that you think will trump others under the heading of the budget?
No, I don't. I think that they all fit in there. I mean, certainly the biggest portions of our budgets go to things like health and human services and public education. So you've got to look at the big money issues first. But no, I don't think that. You know, one of the things about political campaigns is you usually see issues coming to the front and say that was what really the fight was all about and the issues were all about. If you look at the Texas election cycle this time, I didn't catch a whole lot of those that said that was extremely important to the voters. I mean, I did my own internal polling in my district just to get what my voters said that they were interested in, and certainly they put immigration and they put economy and they put taxation right at the top of those issues, but I don't see them as coalescing around specific ideas yet.
Okay, Representative Hochberg, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Jerry that money will be the issue, but I think what has the possibility of being very divisive is why money is the issue. I mean, the state's been going along fine. We have a recession nationally that may be touching us now, but has not historically touched us. But we come into this with a structural deficit that we created several years ago when we put new taxes in place to replace property taxes and paid out a lot more in property tax relief than the new taxes were going to bring. That didn't show up for a while because we had surpluses coming in that saved us. But now those surpluses are going away, the demands are growing, and we're going to face directly into this. At the time, was a $3 or $4 billion per year shortfall in what we have to spend versus what we used to have to spend. Independent of the things that school districts grow at 2.5% a year, which is a huge amount of money. That health and human service needs grow. We have a battle coming that's it's not coming, it's already here on how to fund highways. You know, we've essentially thrown out the idea that we're going to do it all with toll roads. Well, we still got to build the roads, so that money has to come from somewhere. And at a time when people are still not particularly interested in voting for new taxes, I think that could make things very difficult as we get down to closing that budget cycle out.
Representative Turner, what do you think? What's your big issue for the session?
I think we're going to go 3 for 3. I think the whole budget is critical. I mean, how we square away the margin tax with the property tax relief, the whole issues, appraisals and other issues, you can put all of that on one line. I think Jerry will agree that even on the criminal justice side, we've got employment problems with TDCJ. Absolutely. And when you factor in the Texas Department of Public Safety and the security issues, put all of that on one line. On health care services, I think we made a significant step forward when we expanded the CHIP program for working families. We now have added about another 170,000, but I will tell you there's still 1.5 million kids without any health care in the state of Texas. In addition to the adult population, mental health care, you got a Medicaid.
Higher education, any child, any adult who's educated is going to be able to do all of these things that have just been talked about. If we don't educate our children, and with this change in demographics, then woe is we who look back on the time. We need to create jobs, but we need workforce. We need youngsters who graduate from high school, what we're calling post-secondary ready. That doesn't necessarily mean they all go to college. They could go to a technical school. They could go into the workforce. There are lots of people. EDS came to me in my district and said, we could take a really good high school graduate who is a good learner, we could take them and give them a job today at EDS, and then we'll give them the 2 years of community college or whatever they need. We've got to address what kind of student we want graduating from our high schools. And we want all of our children to graduate. And I'm very proud of what we've done on this accountability system, this committee that we've had that has looked all over the state. We've been to 7 cities and talked to people all over the state about what we're going to do with our accountability system. And we are going to change dramatically. We're going to see progress in education. I think you're going to find we've started that when we did end-of-course exams. We got rid of the tax test in high school. We're going to do something similar and get rid of the tax test in the pre-K, and I mean the K through, actually it's 3 through 8. You're going to see progress in so many different areas that you're going to say, okay, every child from kindergarten through the 12th grade is going to have what we call post-secondary readiness skills. We even have in our accountability structure, within 10 years, we want to be in the top 10 states in the nation in graduating students post-secondary ready. That's real progress. And I think you're going to find that education is going to be, my colleagues say this to me every session since I've been chairman of education. Do you have to do education again? You've just had an education session, and I say every time, it is a must. Every session must be a session on education, and I agree. We have to do our tier 1, our emerging research institutions. We owe it to the people of Texas to have more tier 1 institutions, and we've got to be a participant in that. You can't just ask those 7 potential institutions to just go out and do it on their own. It's a very tedious, very revenue-intense process, and we've got to give them the opportunity to know that we're behind them and we're working with them.
Can I say one thing
Senator
about
Watson,
that?
sure.
Because I've been talking about, and I really appreciate what she just said about the tier 1s, and I've been talking about this a lot, and I'm going to bring it back to this budget discussion. The state has to be participating in that, just as Senator Shapiro said, but it also has to be done getting out of this attitude of the budget always being a zero-sum game. That if we have a third tier 1 university in a state this big, that somehow that does damage to our other 2. We have to continue, of course you'd expect me to say that as the senator at the University of Texas, right? But it's true. We have to continue to build these great institutions that are already public tier 1 universities and get others. And that brings it all back to that budget thing.
Right. This is a both and rather than an either or deal as far as that goes.
Absolutely.
I am mindful of the fact that our time is running out. I want to get to a couple last things before we lose you guys completely on this subject. Show of hands. How many people take the governor at his word that he's going to run again in 2010 of the 5 of you? Show of hands.
Can I do a half a hand?
I think you just did.
I think you have to take him at his word on it.
Yeah.
And it'd be silly. It would be silly. It'd just be silly.
Now, Representative Turner,
it'd be silly not to. Is what I'm saying.
Your hand did not even go halfway up. Do you not believe he's running?
He says he's running.
Well, that
was the
sir,
question.
sir, that wasn't my question.
Look, I think he'll be on the ballot for something.
I never question people's motivations and of what they're saying. I mean, he says he's running. I take him at his word that he's running.
Yeah. And I think more importantly, I'm not sure that any of us sitting up here, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, that it really matters in our day-to-day
Absolutely.
lives or in our
I agree.
operation in the House or the Senate. The governor is the governor. And if you want to pass something, he's got to sign it. And if you want to kill something, it helps you if he helps you kill it. And for now, he's the governor. And
And he says he's going to run for re-election.
That's the most important thing. He says he's running for governor. You have to believe that he's running for governor. There's nothing, I mean, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
He is the governor. He says he's running again.
Okay,
And the state.
in fairness to the other side of the same coin, actually, how many people, show of hands, believe that Senator Hutchinson is going to run for governor?
You take people at their word.
I was about
You
to
might
say,
wanna- you might wanna
I was
put
really
yours up
watching you
higher,
close
right?
on that one.
Yeah. And again, irrelevant to the goings-on of the session, obviously. So, okay. We hope so. We have about 10 minutes. Ronnie, you give me a little bit more time, right, to go on. We have about 10 minutes. We started late, so we're going to end a little bit late, not quite as late. And I thought rather than sit up here and ask the questions only myself, Brendan has a microphone, and I think we've got a couple. Well, if Admiral Inman wants to ask a question, I think we'll go to him first. How about that?
Yes.
Admiral.
Thank you very much. I had the privilege 25 years ago to do a nationwide site selection and to bring a joint research venture here that's probably credited beyond what it deserves for helping start the push toward growing the technology industries in the state. That's the ground base. This is all about jobs. This is all about economic opportunity all across the state and whether we're going to have the revenues to grow. When we brought MCC here, the governor and the lieutenant governor assured us that 42% of the cost of higher education that the state was then paying would only go up. It's now down 17 or falling. If we don't put in place a floor for funding higher education all across the board, I'd toss out 25% start. These not only aren't going to be state supported, but much more importantly, we're going to find Texas falling further and further. We may have the biggest population, but we're not going to have the best economy or the best jobs.
Comments about that?
I would say something, Admiral, and first of all, I say thank you for all that you've done, not only for the economy in Austin, but for the whole state of Texas, because you did start a trend. Jerry and I are the beneficiary of that in our area, just like Austin is and Houston is and other places. But I will tell you that we can never, I don't care who it is, the governor, the lieutenant governor, it doesn't matter, no one can tell you the promises that they make in that particular moment for the next legislative session or those subsequent to it. And we all know that. The issue has to be that we as a body and we as elected officials are committed to higher education for the very reasons you just said. And what you have to do, unfortunately, is every session you have to come back to the new people that are involved in education, the new people that are involved in the legislature, and recommit us to that promise. We have not done that. You're absolutely right. And as we look at higher education today, with the top tier, tier one, the emerging research institutions, the 7, and the 26 other institutions, this state has got to make a commitment to all of them, and say we want more students, we want more young people going to college, we want them to have jobs, and we want them to be able to leave the colleges and the universities and the community colleges and the technical schools ready for a job. That's what's made Texas great, and that's what needs to continue.
What we've done is we've gotten ourselves out of what I would consider the appropriate Texas habit, and that is establishing the structure and the tradition of funding the basic infrastructure. And I put education and higher education in as much of the infrastructure as pouring a roadway or water, wastewater. It is the infrastructure of the state. It's the people part of it. And I say this all the time. You can't have been mayor of this city and chair of the Chamber of Commerce in this city and now a state senator in this city and not be able to point to pretty much anything good about our economy in Central Texas right now. I can figure out a way to point to smart decisions that were made about higher education generally and the University of Texas at Austin specifically 25, 35, and 45 years ago. We are not making those decisions today for 25, 35, and 45 years from now. The legislature passed, in my opinion, a very good bill that would create a planning process for higher education. It passed, I think, unanimously in both chambers and was vetoed. It was a planning process for how we're going to get to higher education and more flagship public universities. We've got out of the habit of thinking big sometimes in this state.
And Kirk, let me follow up on that if I might. I've been serving on a committee chaired by Dan Branch from Dallas that is supposed to be about higher ed and public ed funding. It was a very broad mandate with very few specifics. And so one of the questions I started asking was, what does the education of our workforce need to be 20 years from now, 25 years from now? And I have really been surprised and frustrated to find out that there is not a soul who I've been able to find in this state who will stand up and put numbers to that. I get two answers. We need more people to go to college than now. Well, that's a pretty easy goal to meet. We know we're going to have at least one more than we do now. Or people say everybody needs a 4-year degree, which, whether that's true or not, it's not really realistic to get us there.
No.
So we have no idea what sort of higher ed system we want to build, and so we end up tending to do, I hate to say, a political process of saying we'll give this much to the community colleges and this much to higher ed, and what will it take to get UT off our back, et cetera, et cetera.
Piecemeal, very
piecemeal. Where we are now, though, is frightening. Because while every industrialized and a lot of non-tier one countries, if you will, have a greater percentage of college achievement in their younger generation than in their old, the United States as a whole is about even, and Texas is upside down, seriously upside down on that. That's scary. We have about 22% of our adult population has some kind of a degree, and yet nobody will tell me whether we need to get to 40, to 60. The whole Tier 1 question ought to be resolved by deciding how many kids we need graduating from facilities like that in order to fill the job market. Not that would keep us where we are, but would get us to where we'd like to be. And right now, we're as much problem as we've had, Senator, with getting kids ready to go to college. We're exporting 5,000 college students net a year to other states because we don't have top facilities for them to go to.
Absolutely right.
And you're absolutely right. In 25 years, I hope that in 25 years someone will be able to stand up and talk about what they've done now, like you just did about what you did 25 years ago.
I would just like to be a little more practical than 25 years.
Okay.
My biggest concern is the next 5 years. If we can look at a window of 5 years, we haven't had the opportunity to bring chambers of commerce and business people into the education system to tell us what are the jobs they are going to demand of our students in the next 5 years. We keep sending kids from high school to college that are taking remedial courses. We are still going through the process, I think, of not knowing what the job force is. And if we can't do that in this 5-year window, I certainly think it's going to be difficult to do it in a 25-year window. So there is a partnership that needs to exist between what's happening in our high schools, what's happening in our colleges and universities, and what's happening in the business community to make sure that our youngsters are prepared for what is ahead of them.
And that's right. The 5-year window is very important because I will tell you, you've got folks like Samsung and others that have relied upon and have appropriately been receiving economic development incentives to locate here. But they're going to be making their decisions about where they're going to go, starting about 5 years and 10 years. And if they don't have the workforce, and if their workforce can't get their kids appropriately educated in our public schools, I don't care how much we give them in economic development incentives, they're going someplace else.
That's always their first
An
question.
economic development incentive is not an economic growth package. The economic growth package is going to be what we're able to do with their workforce.
Absolutely.
But I think we can all come into agreement on where, generally speaking, where we would like to go. The question is, are we prepared to design the blueprint to actually start building?
Right.
I think, and I think that's where we fall apart. Whether or not when you look at the budget of the state of Texas, do you see that as a priority in the budget?
You don't.
And you do not see it. Whether or not,
I'm always saying it is.
well, and whether or not when we look at how we are financing higher ed,
Nobody listens.
the way we are financing higher ed, is that a policy that is bringing more kids in the door and helping to keep our schools competitive, not just with other colleges and universities in the state of Texas or even in this country, but globally across the globe. And I don't think you see that. And so I think there comes a point in time when the state of Texas has to decide, yes, it is a top-notch priority. Yes, these are things we need to do. And yes, you can look at our budgetary document and you will see it. My pastor always says something, and I like. He says, if I ask you to turn in your checkbook to me, to the extent you itemize, I bet you ought to be able to see your priorities on your spending. Okay? The same thing applies to the state of Texas and its budget. It is our checkbook. If you look at it today, will you be able to see that we are moving in that direction or not? I will submit to you that we are not. So we talk a mean game, but in terms of educating our kids, reflecting that they are a priority, that we want to be competitive across the globe, that we're willing to put our money, invest in our kids, I will say to you that the state of Texas talks a mean game, but it simply has not done that.
With all due respect, and I do have a tremendous amount of respect, it is the largest item in our budget. We spend more money in education than we spend in health and human services, than we spend in criminal justice, than we spend in transportation. It is the largest item in the budget. The question is, how are we using those dollars?
And I agree. I don't disagree with you on that.
Okay.
And since the two of them, I'm going to throw in the frightening fact. The top 10% of all Chinese school graduates, and we look at the top 10% of how the outstanding students, et cetera, top 10% of the students in China outnumber all students we have in the United States. And so what's going to happen to us in 5 or 10 or 15 years with the progress that they're making in their educational systems, and what's going to happen with the jobs and the technology and the new science and the new developments and the new products, et cetera, if we don't make it so that our kids are competing with and able to compete very successfully with those around the world who are also the top 10%, and there's a lot more of them than there are of our kids.
Senator Watson, last comment.
Yeah, and that's where we have been resting on our laurels. I mean, it used to be a lot of these other countries didn't have the medical schools. They didn't have the facilities, and they would come here, we would educate them, and then they would generally stay. So we were able to get an advantage. Now, because of immigration policy and because of lack of capacity, we find ourselves in a situation where that's not, and a third thing is these other countries have figured it out, and they're building great medical schools and great institutions of higher learning, so we're in a far more competitive situation. Interesting thing, if you look at MD Anderson, let's just use MD Anderson as a great example because we all know it and we know what it has meant to the state and to the world in terms of education and health care. They're asking as part of their budget request that they get restored basically to 2001 levels. By the end, by the way, they don't want it in 1 year. They're not going to be greedy and ask for it all in 1 year. By the end of the biennium. So by the end of 2011, they only want to be a decade behind where they were. Well, it may be the biggest part of the budget, but are we doing right as part of that budget overall?
Ronnie, we do have
I snuck up on
I
you.
knew it. I knew she was right.